Ages.
At the beginning of the 6th century, Emperor Anastasius occupied the imperial throne, ruling from 491 to 518. He governed a state that continued to perceive itself, fundamentally, as the Roman Empire, an empire identified with the Mediterranean world as a whole. To modern historians, this conception may appear illusory, shaped as it is by temporal distance and hindsight. For contemporaries, however, it was not an illusion at all. Despite ruling from Constantinople, the so-called New Rome, Anastasius was understood to be emperor of a single, unified Roman Empire. The distinction between an Eastern and a Western Roman Empire was, above all, a later historiographical construction. In the eyes of 6th century observers, the empire remained one political entity. Although the western provinces had fragmented into kingdoms ruled by peoples traditionally classified as barbarians, this did not necessarily imply the end of imperial authority. Through the granting of honorific titles and the strategic use of the immense wealth of the imperial treasury, resources that would far surpass those of the West for centuries, the emperor in Constantinople could maintain influence beyond direct territorial control. Barbarian kings were often understood as client monarchs, formally recognizing the supremacy of the emperor. Many of them conceived their own authority precisely within this framework, seeing themselves not as independent rulers but as participants in a broader Roman order. The interruption of imperial succession in the West with the deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 was perceived by few contemporaries as a decisive event. The idea that East and West required distinct emperors was relatively recent, little more than a century old. Moreover, the reality of barbarian military power in the West, often mediated or influenced from Constantinople, remained essentially unchanged by the absence of an emperor residing on Western soil. From the perspective of Anastasius's reign, imperial continuity remained intact. The empire ruled by Anastasius continued, in many respects, to be the heir of the classical Mediterranean world. Its fundamental structure still revolved around the city, which, together with its rural hinterland, formed a relatively autonomous economic and cultural unit. Although cities no longer possessed the political prerogatives of the ancient polis, urban elites retained considerable local influence. Provincial governors, often recruited from the same social strata, generally found it more prudent to cooperate with urban notables than to confront them directly. Cities, with their forums, theaters, courts, and educational institutions, continued to form the foundation of the literate elite that occupied administrative posts throughout the empire. Imperial officials frequently returned to their cities of origin after completing their service, living from the fundamentally rural wealth generated by their landed estates. This pattern reinforced the enduring connection between city and countryside. From the 6th century onward, however, this urban model began to change. The pace and depth of this transformation remain subjects of intense historiographical debate, but the sources suggest that the traditional balance between city, elite, and empire was gradually being reshaped. The city was also the fundamental unit of Christian organization. From the end of the 2nd century, Christianity, initially a predominantly urban phenomenon, had been structured around the city and its surrounding territory under the leadership of a single bishop. As the empire underwent progressive Christianization from the 4th century onward, the bishop, appointed for life, became a central figure among local elites. Canon 15 of the Council of Nicaea prohibited the transfer of bishops between sees, reinforcing the deep bond between bishop and city. In many cases, bishops exercised functions similar to those of the defensor civitatis, acting as judges or mediators within their communities, even when they did not officially hold that title. Christianity, however, was never a peaceful religion. Its insistence on doctrinal precision, combined with its expanding social influence, ensured that theological disagreements became political, social, and cultural divisions. Although modern historians hesitate to interpret social conflict exclusively in religious terms, it is undeniable that in this period such conflicts were frequently expressed and understood through the language of faith. Religious disputes are inseparable from the history of the 6th century. Anastasius inherited religious tensions rooted in the Council of Chalcedon of 451. The council sought to resolve Christological disputes concerning the relationship between Christ's human and divine natures. Although its formula was accepted by papal legates and judged compatible with the teachings of Cyril of Alexandria, the assertion that Christ existed, in two natures, was rejected by many Christians in Syria and Egypt, who saw it as a betrayal of the Cyrillian tradition. Rejection of Chalcedon often took violent forms. Bishops required military protection to reassume their sees, and ecclesiastical leaders appointed by Chalcedonian authority were murdered by hostile crowds. Monks, increasingly influential, frequently fueled these conflicts. Faced with the impossibility of enforcing Chalcedon by force, Emperor Zeno issued the Henoticon in 482, a compromise edict that avoided explicitly condemning the council. This policy, maintained by Anastasius, provoked the Acacian Schism between Rome and Constantinople, which lasted until 518. Despite their apparent abundance, 6th century sources present significant limitations. Classical style histories survive, such as Procopius' Wars, the works of Agathias and Theophylact Simocatta, and fragments of Menander the Guardsman. Christian chronicles, ecclesiastical histories, hagiography, Syriac sources, and material evidence from archaeology and numismatics all contribute to our understanding, though each reflects specific ideological perspectives rather than neutral observation. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. In the latter part of Anastasius's reign, sources indicate growing popular discontent. Officially attributed to religious policy, this unrest was likely intensified by economic difficulties and military insecurity. Peace with Persia was broken in 502, leading to the capture of frontier cities and the construction of the fortress of Dara. Internal disturbances, including riots over the Trisagion and the revolt of Vitalian, exposed the fragility of imperial authority. Anastasius died in 518. His successor would mark a turning point. Anastasius was succeeded by Justin I, a former Illyrian peasant who had risen to command the Excubitors. Under Justin, Chalcedonian orthodoxy was restored, bringing an end to the Acacian Schism. Yet this restoration reignited religious tensions. Justin's nephew, Justinian, soon emerged as the central figure in government, shaping the future of the empire. Justinian became co-emperor in 527 and sole emperor shortly thereafter, ruling until 565. His reign was marked by legal reform, military campaigns, monumental construction, and intense efforts to achieve religious unity. It is tempting to interpret his rule as the execution of a grand project to restore the Roman Empire in Christian form. This interpretation finds support in many contemporary sources, particularly in Justinian's legislative activity. The reform of Roman law, initiated early in Justinian's reign, resulted in the Corpus Juris Civilis. This monumental compilation systematized centuries of legal tradition and enshrined a worldview that united Roman heritage, Christian orthodoxy, and imperial authority, defining priesthood and empire as complementary gifts from God intended to order human life in harmony. This conception became one of Justinian's most enduring legacies. Justinian's military campaigns are often seen as expressions of this imperial vision. Yet their motivations were complex. The reconquest of North Africa under Belisarius may have been driven as much by political necessity as by ideological ambition. The Italian campaign began on a modest scale and evolved into a long and devastating conflict. Although initial successes rekindled imperial aspirations, the war caused immense destruction. Italy was formally reintegrated only in 554. Justinian's building programs do not easily fit the idea of a coherent imperial plan. Many fortifications had been initiated under Anastasius, while major reconstructions in Constantinople followed the destruction of the Nika revolt. Nevertheless, the structures erected afterward, especially Hagia Sophia, stood out for their lasting magnificence. Contemporary authors describe the church as a vision of heaven on earth, defined by light, harmony, and cosmic symbolism. The 530s were marked by earthquakes, drought, revolt, and reconstruction. Romanos the Melodist's Kontakion on earthquakes and fires interpreted these disasters as divine punishment and called for repentance, beginning with the emperor himself. Urban reconstruction, particularly that of Hagia Sophia, was presented as both imperial solicitude and divine mercy, reinforcing a worldview in which God governed the cosmos and the emperor ruled the oikoumene in his name. In 542, bubonic plague reached Constantinople, killing perhaps more than half its population. Subsequent outbreaks followed for decades. Historians continue to debate the long-term economic consequences of the plague, but its psychological and social impact was undeniable. In his final years, Justinian was reportedly associated with the Julianist heresy of Aphthardadocetism, though this claim remains contested. He died without heirs in 565. His successor, Justin II, pursued an aggressive foreign policy that weakened imperial stability. By the end of the 6th century, the empire faced invasions, revolts, and internal collapse. Yet these crises also marked transformation. Cities were reshaped by Christian institutions, bishops gained authority, and a new form of empire emerged, different from the Roman world of Anastasius, but capable of survival and renewal. At the beginning of the 6th century, the Roman Empire still understood itself as a unified Mediterranean power, ruled from Constantinople and grounded in a long tradition of imperial continuity. Under Anastasius, the structures of the classical world, cities, urban elites, and imperial administration, remained largely intact, even as religious conflict increasingly shaped political and social life. The reign of Justinian represented both the height of imperial ambition and the limits of its realization. Legal reform, military reconquest, monumental architecture, and efforts at religious unity expressed a powerful vision of a Christian Roman Empire. Yet wars, revolts, natural disasters, and plague revealed the fragility of this ideal. By the end of the 6th century, the empire had been profoundly transformed. Classical urban society gave way to a Christianized landscape dominated by the church, and imperial authority was redefined in close relationship with faith. What emerged was not simply a story of decline, but of change, a Roman world reshaped into something new, standing on the threshold of the Byzantine Age.